I'm Chris Long with B&W Trailer Hitches, and today we're going to install the all-new Turnoverball Gooseneck hitch in this 2017 F250 Super Duty. Let's get started. For 2017, Ford redesigned their Super Duty line of trucks. At B&W, we have two different Turnoverball hitch kits available for these trucks. The first is the GNRK1117, which is what you'll use for four-wheel drive models. That's what we'll be installing today. The other is the GNRK1116, which is what you'll use for two-wheel drive models. Let's get this truck on the lift, get the spare wheel and tire down, and get started on our installation. With the truck properly positioned and the spare wheel and tire out of the way, the next step is to drill our 4-inch hole in the bed. This is an excellent opportunity to make sure you're following the installation instructions so that your hole will be properly positioned in the bed. I've added a 1/16 of an inch for the thickness of this spray-in bed liner. So if you have a truck that's got a spray-in liner, you want to be sure to account for that thickness. So I've got my forward and aft mark here. And then I want to make sure that I'm properly centered in the truck left to right. So I take a measurement from the inside edge of one fender well and keep doing that until I get my mark centered up left and right. Once that's the same on both sides, you'll make your mark there. Center punch the hole, and then drill your pilot hole. Now that you have a properly positioned pilot hole, it's time to cut a 4-inch hole in the bed of the truck. Be sure to use the proper size hole saw. In this case, it's a 4-inch. We actually have these available at B&W if you don't have one. Line the arbor up with your pre-drilled pilot hole, and I like to actually run the saw backwards a little bit just to establish a cutting groove. Okay, now we're going to go forward and cut our hole in the bed. After you cut the 4-inch hole in the bed, it's a good idea to eliminate any tail filings that might remain. This will help ensure that the center section goes up into position a little bit easier later in the installation. You can use a hand file to do that. In this case, I'm going to use a powered rotofile. But before I do that, now's a good time to pause and point out the fact that in 2017, the Ford Super Duty pickup trucks have gone to an all-aluminum body. And per Ford's service bulletin, anytime you disturb the factory paint on those aluminum surfaces, they want you to coat that aluminum with a pre-approved coating of some sort. We've given you the information to access that bulletin right here in the installation instructions for a complete list of what those coatings are. What we're going to do on this particular truck is I'm going to use a primer coat and a black spray paint coat from underneath so that my overspray doesn't discolor the spray-in liner. But if you have a truck that doesn't have a spray-in liner, it might be a good idea to get a bottle of matching touch-up paint. That way you can coat the raw aluminum edge with a matching paint and give you a nice clean appearance. Let's go ahead and file the tail filings out of this hole. Alright, we've transitioned to the underside of the truck, and one of the next steps that you'll want to complete, especially if you're installing the hitch by yourself, is to lower the exhaust down to give you a little more room to work. Now this isn't completely necessary, but it will make your life easier when it comes time to install components and use power tools up in these tight quarters. So I'm going to lower the exhaust by removing the rear exhaust hanger. I'll take out these two inboard fasteners and these two opposing outboard fasteners. This will bring the rear hanger down. You might also consider taking out the next forward series of fasteners on the hanger to allow the exhaust to come down a little further. In the next several steps of the installation process, we're basically going to be building the support structure for the center section of the gooseneck hitch to be attached to. And we're going to start by installing the inboard and outboard side plates on the frame of the truck. Now on four-wheel drive models of the Super Duty, you'll find that Ford has provided an inboard side plate already welded into position. However, on two-wheel drive models, you may or may not have this bracket. That's why it's important to order the GNRK1116 two-wheel drive kit, because we will provide you with these inboard brackets in the case that the two-wheel drive doesn't have it. So since this particular truck already has our inboard plates in position, I'm going to go ahead and install the outboard plate in the driver's side fender well, and then once we get that installed, we'll repeat the process on the passenger side. The outboard side plates differ from each other between the driver's and passenger side. The passenger side plate is the shorter one, and the driver's side plate is the longer one. Simply put it up against the side of the frame, line the holes up between the plate and the frame, take your 4-inch long by 5/8 diameter grade 8 bolts with a flat washer under the head, and put the bolts through to the other side. Flat washer, lock washer, and nut. And we're just going to put these down hand tight for now, and we'll repeat that on the passenger side. The next step is to install our 4 crossmember brackets. Now, the installation instructions will give you several different diagrams to help orient and place those brackets, but I wanted to take a moment to lay these out on the tailgate to help make that process of identification a little bit easier. All 4 brackets are a little different from each other. The quickest way to set these apart is to find the largest of the 4. That'll be your driver's side front, and it'll be oriented in the truck the same way that you see it here on the tailgate. The flat portion will be facing the bed, with the curved portion facing rearward, and this flange facing inward. The passenger side front bracket is smaller than the driver's side, and it looks a little offset. I'll explain that in just a second. Also, the flat side towards the bed, curved portion towards the rear, and the flange facing inward. The reason these look offset and like they're not a matched pair is because the front cross member, you'll notice that on the passenger side you have 2 large holes on this end, and you have a single large hole on the driver's side end. This front cross member will end up being positioned behind the flange of the driver's side bracket and in front of the flange of the passenger side bracket. That's the reason why those look the way they do. The rear 2 brackets, the only thing different between them is the driver's side versus passenger side. They're exact mirror images of each other. So as long as the flat portion faces the bed, the curved portion faces forward, and the flanges face inward, you'll have those properly identified. Now let's get under the truck and get these placed in their proper positions. We'll begin our crossmember bracket placement with the driver's side. We'll take that front driver's side bracket, place it up over the top of the fuel tank and the electrical harness. Be sure you're on top of the inboard and outboard plates and place it into position. Then we'll do the driver's side rear. Again, over the inboard and outboard plates. And then we'll repeat that for the passenger side. Now that we have the crossmember brackets properly positioned, we're going to bolt them to the side plates. Now in your installation kit, you're going to find one of 2 styles of 1/2-inch locking fastener for these locations. You're either going to have the one with the thread locker pre-applied to the threads, or the one with the neoprene lock inside the groove. It doesn't matter which one you have, they're both grade 8. Just know that these are the locations for whichever fastener you have in your kit. Take the time to line the fastener up with the threaded hole in the plate and get it started. Be sure you do not cross thread this. You want a nice clean start, about a revolution and a half. There we go. And we're up against that neoprene lock, but I can tell that's not cross threaded. And I've already got my front one in here. Now what we're going to do is tighten this down enough that the head of the bolt just misses making contact with the side plate. We want this to be able to move backward and forward as we need space. So I'm going to take the impact wrench and tighten that up just shy of the head touching the plate. Now we'll do the outboard fasteners. Now we're going to bolt the crossmember brackets to the outboard side plates. And just like the inboard plates, you want to line your fastener up with the threaded hole in the bracket. Get it started nice and easy. Make sure that you're not cross-threaded. Same thing with the front. And then we'll tighten these up the same way we did the inboard plates, where we're just shy of touching, and then repeat that process on the passenger side. Now we're going to install the front cross member. This is the large piece of square tubing that has 2 5/8-inch diameter holes on the passenger side and 1 5/8 diameter hole on the driver's side. So be sure it's oriented in there that way. You're going to take your washer plate, which is this long thin strap of steel that has the 2 5/8 holes in one end. Line that up with the passenger side. Take your 5/8 diameter by 4-inch long bolts and go ahead and insert those through both the plate and the cross member. And we're going to attach the passenger side to the cross member bracket first. So roll this into position in front of the exhaust into the forward side of that passenger side forward cross member bracket and insert the bolts into place. Let's go ahead and get those temporarily secured with our lock washers and nuts. Here's one. And two. Okay. Now we can move over to the driver's side. Those can just be hand tight. Take your remaining 5/8 bolt, 4-inch long, and we're going to insert this in the outermost hole of the driver's side front crossmember bracket and wiggle the front crossmember into position until the bolt lines up with the hole, and then go all the way through both walls of that front crossmember, just like so. Then we'll secure that with a rectangular washer plate, lock washer, and nut. Now we're going to install the rear cross member, which is the 1-inch thick solid steel bar with the 2 5/8 diameter pre-threaded holes on either side. Now there is no left or right orientation on this, so just go ahead and place it up into position. And we want to get this on the back side of the rear cross member brackets, so it'll be between the cross member brackets and the bed hat channel. And then hold that up with one hand while you get a fastener started on either side, just to hold it into position. Got that set on the driver's side, and then we'll get one in on the passenger side. Now these are the 5/8 short bolts with a lock washer under the head of the bolt and then a flat washer. And then pull this to line it up and get it threaded in so it'll help hold you into place. Okay, I got that one started on the passenger side. Now we'll put in the remaining 2 bolts, 1 per side, and snug those down hand tight, and then we'll be ready to put our center section in. Now we can install the center section. It's a good idea to make sure that the front cross member is pushed as far forward as it will go, and that the rear cross member is pulled as far rearward as it will go. That's what will give us the maximum amount of working room between those 2 cross members. Now you shouldn't need an overhead lifting device for this particular hitch because the center section does not have to be held firmly to the underside of the bed. Just have your hardware ready and you should be able to hold it into position with one hand while you put your bolts in with the other. We're going to put our long 4-inch bolts in through the front cross member and our shorter 1.5-inch bolts threaded into the rear cross member. I'm going to raise this up and show you this curved portion of the release pin right here with the 2 square holes in it. That's where the release handle will attach later in the installation. This needs to be oriented towards the driver's side of the truck. So I'm going to flip this over so that's to my left. I'm going to raise this up into position, making sure that the collar of the center section goes up into the 4-inch hole that we drilled earlier. Hold that into position with one hand while we take one of our 4-inch bolts and bring that in through the front. Okay, that'll hold that. And then take one of your short bolts and line it up with the hole in the rear cross member right there and get it started. Okay, I can feel it threading into the rear cross member. Now let's get a lock washer, flat washer, and nut on that first bolt. Put the flat washer on first, lock washer and nut Okay, that'll hold that center section safely in position while I put in the rest of the hardware, and then we can go on with the tightening sequence. Now that everything's bolted into position, it's time to tighten it all down. Now, given how much hardware there is in this particular hitch kit, it's very important that you follow the tightening sequence that's outlined in the installation instructions. The first fasteners that we'll tighten are the 1/2-inch fasteners that tighten the center section to the cross members, followed immediately by the 5/8 fasteners that tighten the cross members to the cross member brackets. Now, you'll need a 3/4-inch wrench set up for the 1/2-inch fasteners and a 15/16 wrench set up for the 5/8 fasteners. So I'm going to start by tightening these down first, followed by the ones back here on the back. And then once I have all of my 1/2-inch fasteners tightened, I'll move out to the 15/16. Basically, you're going to tighten the 8 fasteners along the back cross member and the 7 fasteners across the front cross member. The next step of the tightening sequence is important because it will determine the final position of the center section in the truck. It'd be a good idea to make sure that the collar of the center section is engaged in the 4-inch hole of the bed before you continue. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered, just make sure it's within the hole. The bolts that we'll be dealing with in this step are the vertical bolts that run through the inboard side plates and the crossmember brackets. And the first one that we want to tighten is the passenger side forward inboard bolt. We're going to tighten that one down, followed by the driver's side rear inboard bolt. After those 2 bolts are tight, then we want to recheck the center section to make sure it's still within the 4-inch hole. And as long as it is, then we can come underneath and tighten the passenger side rear inboard bolt, followed by the driver's side forward inboard bolt. Tighten those down good and tight. We'll torque them later. Now that the 4 inboard vertical bolts have been tightened, we want to do the 4 outboard vertical bolts. 2 of them will be here in the driver's side fender well, the other 2 in the passenger side. We'll get these 2 first and then go take care of the other 2. The last 4 bolts in our sequence to tighten are the 4 5/8 bolts that hold the side plates to the frame of the truck. You've got 2 on the driver's side, 2 on the passenger side. The one that might give you a little bit of a challenge is the forward one on the driver's side, because on the other side of this frame you've got the fuel tank, wiring harnesses, hoses, all kinds of obstructions. You're going to have to hold the nut with a 15/16 wrench, and if you don't have a helper to hold that wrench, you're going to need to hold the wrench from spinning while you tighten from the outside. Otherwise, the wrench will spin and damage all those components back there. So I'm going to get under there and do that right now. After following the proper tightening sequence and everything's tightened down, you need to torque all the fasteners. Be sure to torque the 1/2-inch fasteners to 100 foot-pounds and all of the larger 5/8 fasteners to 150 foot-pounds. Now it's time to install the release handle. It's the long flat strap with the 2 square holes in the end. And there are a couple of different methods of getting this handle in. I'll share both of those with you. The thing you need to be aware of is that there's limited clearance between the top of these side plates and the bottom of the bed. And there's harnesses and stuff on the other side, so don't just shove the handle through. You could cause damage to those harnesses. So try to be easy with the rod when you insert it. Now, if your truck is up in the air and the rear suspension is hanging under its own weight, you'll have enough clearance that you should be able to line the rod up with this raised area of the bed stiffener. Just line it up with that and slide it right through until the back end of this handle clears the bed lip. Once you've cleared that bed lip, slide the handle forward in front of that depression area in the bed stiffener, and then you can hook it up from underneath. Now, if you're installing the hitch with your truck on the ground, the rear suspension will be compressed and you won't have as much clearance in here, so you may not be able to line the rod up the way that I just showed you. So if that's the case, you may need to come in from the back here in this corner area between the bed lip and this hat channel. Now, it will be a little bit more of a tight fit, so work it through as best as you can at an angle. Be sure you're not pushing on those harnesses. And once you get past the bed lip, swing it over to the side and slide forward of that depression in that bed stiffener like in the previous method. Now we can hook our handle up from underneath. Now let's attach the release handle to the latch mechanism. What you'll do is reach up here, take a hold of the latch mechanism and pull it all the way open, and be sure that it's engaged in the catch. Then take something, I'm using a little Allen wrench, to put inside the open area of that latch, just to keep this from accidentally coming shut and smashing your fingers. Now take the end of the latch handle that has the 2 square holes that we fed in earlier and place it on top of the latch mechanism, and then take your 1/4 inch bolts, drop those in from the top. Okay, and then take the 2 lock nuts and go ahead and thread those on. You'll only thread on a turn or 2 because they are a lock nut. Now what you want to do is go ahead and tighten these down enough that they're still moving a little bit. Don't tighten them down to where it doesn't allow any movement. Like so. And then take your safety piece, in this case the Allen wrench, out and allow this latch to shut. Don't have your hand in the way. Okay, and then you want to reach outside the frame and see how you've got this forward and aft placement of that handle. Get that handle to where it's parallel with the body lines in this bed stiffener. You do not want that to be too far forward or the latch mechanism won't work correctly. So be sure you're at least parallel, and if you can come a little further back, that's even better. But be sure you're at least parallel with those lines, and then go ahead and tighten the rod while you're holding it into place, while it's parallel with the lines in that bed stiffener. Right there. And then you'll want to check the latch to make sure that it opens and locks, and then pull the latch back to make sure it shuts. If you're having trouble with the latch mechanism staying shut, then you might want to adjust the angle of the handle and the latch mechanism by loosening and retightening those bolts. All right, now we're going to drill our holes through the bed for the safety chain loops. It's very important that these holes are drilled exactly perpendicular or straight with the truck bed. So I'm going to use a large bit, in this case it's a 17/32, to line that up with the hole and make sure that I'm not canted from one side to the other or forward and back. And I want to drill just long enough to give me a little bit of a divot in the aluminum. Now with that in the aluminum, I can take a smaller pilot bit, line the tip of my pilot bit up with that divot that I just created, and drill the hole nice and straight through the bed. And I'm going to repeat that process for the other 3 holes. And with the pilot holes drilled, I'm going to double check that they're exactly 2 inches apart inside the bed of the truck. As long as they are, then we can go ahead and enlarge these out to the 1/2 inch diameter. That's what I'm going to do next. All right, we've got our 1/2 inch holes drilled through the bed for the safety chain loops. I've already taken the time to eliminate the tail filings and coat that raw aluminum from inside the truck bed. Then I drop the U-bolts down through the holes, as you can see here. Now I've got this front one done so that you can see what it should look like when you're finished. But what you'll do is take this tension spring, which has a wide end and a narrow end, and put the wide end up over your U-bolt. Then take a 1/2 inch lock nut and thread it on as tight as you can by hand. And then what you'll do is tighten this up until the bottom of the nut is flush with the end of the U-bolt, as you see in the front one. We'll repeat that process for the other side, and then that'll wrap up our safety chain loops. All right, now that we have our safety chain loops properly installed, it's time to finish the installation. If you lowered the exhaust, be sure to raise it back into position, and be sure to put the spare wheel and tire back in place. One other detail to think about, that area where the release handle operates, you might inspect that place to see whether or not the electrical harnesses might be rubbing against that rod. If they are, take the time to zip tie those out of the way so that the release handle can operate freely. Now as you see here, the ball is in the upright and ready position for towing a trailer. When you're done, you can simply disengage the latch handle, invert the ball, drop it back into place, re-engage the latch handle, and in true B&W fashion, a hitch when you need it, a level bed when you don't.